Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Nazir Daf Samach Gimel. Okay, we have till Samach Vav. We are almost done. Very exciting. A few announcements about the siyum, just so everything's clear. There are a number of siyums around Israel. I will clarify just so that in case people who are English speakers want to go to siyums around the country. There's one in Ranana on Wednesday night with Rabbi Eliezer from Yeshivat Risha, who's going to connect between Pesach and nezirut. And it will be on Zoom, so anybody who wants to watch it, it'll be Wednesday evening in Israel. There's one tomorrow night, on Tuesday night in Modi'in, with Rabbi Yafi Clymer, and on Thursday in Jerusalem with Dr. Karen Kirschenbaum. That one, by the way, they will not be learning the full daf. Actually, I have to check in Modi'in also. So they're learning part of the daf from the Mishna to the end. So if you're from Yerushalayim and you're going to the siyum, make sure to learn until the Mishna, kind of toward the bottom of Samach Vav. And you can listen to last year's Shiur. It's actually, I noticed in last year's, I think most of that is, I think I taught till that Mishna on Daf Samach Hey. So you'll find it at the end of Daf Samach Hey on last year's stuff, which can always be found on the website. You just go to the drop-down menu, do Nazir 65, and you'll find it. Wednesday, Friday in Alon Shvut, Shabbos in Neve Daniel, and in the Shomron on Wednesday. So you have siyums to go to. If you're abroad, don't live in Israel. So there's a siyum that Hadran is organizing in Manhattan for those central location for some people, with Rabbanit Amutal Shaval on Thursday night. So you can join us in Mindy Heck's house, and there's details. There was a flyer that went around. If you didn't see it, so email us at info@hadran.org.il, and we will send it your way with the details of how to register. And there's siyum in Long Island, and perhaps also in your local communities. Check your WhatsApp group, and if there isn't one and you want to initiate, feel free to initiate. If you're not part of a community yet, go look on our site. There's a tab that says communities, and you can see different communities we have around the world and try to find one close to you. And the more important one, which is relevant to everybody here, which is join the one on Thursday, which is a Zoom siyum on Thursday evening, Israel time. That is at the top of our website on the homepage. You can register there and get your own personal Zoom link. And that will be with Rabbi Leibowitz, talking about why the importance of hair. We're going to talk about again today, and with Goldie Gilab, one of our learners. So there's the whole list of all the siyums, and a reminder that on Thursday there's no regular class because, as usual, we are learning the complete daf at the siyum. Okay, so no class on Thursday specifically. Okay, with that, we will get started. New Mishna. Today is another one of those days. This is just, you're starting to learn that this is just typical for Nazir, is that we're going to have a lot of confusion about what exactly the Gemara is saying. And maybe today's a good lesson in when you express yourself, you should express yourself as clearly as possible to make sure that something you think is obvious to you might not be obvious to someone else that you're speaking to. You should make yourself clear and explain it well, because they did not explain things perfectly well here. And because of that, there was a lot of different opinions. This is perhaps, people say this often about Nazir. It wasn't a well-edited Masechet. And again, we're going to have one of those dapim where you might walk out somewhat confused because it's confusing and it's not clear really what they meant, and things that we might take as a given now, all of a sudden might not be such a clear given later on in the daf. We might say, oh, that word we thought meant something, maybe it really didn't mean what we thought it meant. So with that introduction, we're going to get started. Nazir Shegila. So again, the Nazir starts off and they go through the 30 days, they go, or however many days it was, they go through the process, they bring sacrifices, but they have, and then they shave. That's the last part of the process. Again, there's some things that happen after. Obviously, you put the hair under the pot, but again, the pot and the boiling up of the meat of the shlemim is not the central part. Central part of the sacrifice is always the zrikat dam, the sprinkling of the blood. So you shaved, you're done. Say, great, I can go drink wine, I can go do what I want now. But no dalo shu tameh. But then right after that, you find out that way back when, in the middle of your nezirut, you became impure to a dead body. Well, it depends what kind of impurity it was. Im tum'ah yidua sotir. If it was tum'ah that was noticeable, we're going to now talk about two types of tum'ot. Both are cases where I didn't know I was impure. But the question is, why? So one is a case where I didn't notice it, but it was pretty clear to to the naked eye that I could have seen it. Another is called Tumat tehom. We're going to have a whole bunch of definitions of what exactly falls into that category. But tehom means the depths. It means there was a body deep down, right? This happens on archaeological digs all the time, and they dig up bones and they find out, oh, there was a dead body under here. So we didn't know there was a dead body, and I walked through this place having no idea there was a dead body. And it was not only did I not know, like first case also I didn't know, but it was deep down buried and it wasn't really noticeable to anybody. Not just that I kind of missed it. So if it's Tum'ah Yidu'ah, so now since I'm done with my nezirut already, I finished the whole process, and I find out that, for example, on day 15, I walked into an area that had Tum'ah there. So if it was Tum'ah Yidu'ah and it was noticeable and I just didn't notice it, well, sotil. Then, now, sotil at this point, this is going to be the word that we really don't know what it means. Sotir means it cancels the previous days. So it sounds like it cancels, right? It could cancel, we don't know, the sacrifices I brought, the shaving, or the entire thing. So right now it seems like they translate, it cancels all 30 days. Later, we're going to see maybe not exactly, depending on how you translate, how you interpret something later on. But it sounds like, look, you were impure in the middle of your nezirut. Cancels your whole thing. So what? You didn't know. You should have known. But in Tumat tehom, eno sotil. But if you were impure in a way that it was something buried deep under the ground and no one would have noticed it, and somehow you found out, maybe someone was doing an excavation there, well, then it would be sotil. And then eno sotil. It doesn't cancel your days, even though you were really impure. It's fascinating. Now, what the Gemara is going to do, I'm already going to kind of tell you where we're going to go. The first thing the Gemara is going to do is say, even though we're not finished with the Mishna yet, the Gemara is going to say, what's our source? They're going to bring two different rabbis, Amorae Eretz Yisrael, who give two different psukim. And then we're going to reject both of them. We're going to have a question against one of them, and then we're going to have a question against both of them. And then we're going to reject. And in the end, we're going to say, it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And not only is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, I'll already tell you, it's specifically when it comes to Nazir and specifically when it comes to Korban Pesach. Okay, we're leading into Pesach. By the way, I forgot to tell you, but I remembered. Talking about Pesach, we created a page on our website with all the Pesach learning. We did it for the Yamim Noraim and Sukkot. We did it again for Pesach. So if you're looking for Pesach learning, there's Pesach learning on our site. You can look up Learning for Pesach. It's one of the tabs now at the top. And you can find Pesach learning. It's got what dapim or good recommended dapim for learning, and you can just learn dapim in order. Or there's all sorts of extra shiurim we had on our site from Sachim and other that have all sorts of interesting topics. There's also the course that I taught a number of years ago of the skills course with different topics from Leila Seder. So there's all sorts of resource material that you can use to prepare for Pesach if you're interested. Okay, so anyway, back to Pesach. If it's Korban Pesach and you're supposed to bring the Korban Pesach, and then you find out that you were tamei, tumat tehom, or let's say you even brought the Korban Pesach, and then you find out later that day that you have been impure. Okay, so basically, tumat tehom does not disqualify you from bringing the Korban Pesach. Okay, it's a unique halacha for Nazir and for Pesach, and we're going to see later that it was a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, another halacha l'Moshe Sinai by Nazir. We keep seeing them, and there seem to be a lot of these traditions, which basically means we don't really understand why, because in the end, you were impure. What's the difference if it was down in the depths or not? Tumah goes up, it should have made you impure, but it's a unique halacha. So again, according to the Mishna so far, we've gotten one case, which is one case that splits into two. You finished everything, including the shaving. By the way, another thing we're going to see in the Gemara, I'm kind of setting this all up so that when we get there, it'll be very clear because you'll have already heard about it before. This Mishna clearly holds, we're going to say, like Rabbi Eliezer, who holds the tiglachat is ma'akevet, that the shaving is the important part. If you don't shave, you can't drink wine yet. Even if you did the sacrifices. If you remember, we saw machloket. Maybe if you sprinkle the blood of one of the sacrifices, that's enough and you can already drink wine. This one seems to do the cutting point. The cutting off point is the shaving itself and not before that, because the shaving is essential. So a Nazir who shaves and after the shaving process finished everything, finds out at some point earlier, the Nazir had become impure. So let's say it's me. So I find out that on day 15, I went through some place where there was Tumat. If it was a noticeable Tumat and I just missed it somehow, I'm impure and I have to go back and cancel all those other days. If it's Tumat tehom, I don't have to redo my nezirut at all. I don't have to do anything regarding my nezirut. It's as if I finished it. But im ad shelo gilach, but again, showing that the shaving is the critical moment. If I finish my sacrifices, but haven't yet shaved, and then I find out, now it doesn't matter, Tumat tehom or Tumat yidua. Ben kachu, whether it's Tumat yidua, whether it's Tumat tehom, it doesn't matter which type of impurity, I'm sotel. It cancels it. Now, again, it doesn't say what it cancels. Again, it maybe cancels all the 30 days, maybe something less. We're going to get to that later. Now, the Mishna, before we finish, wants to explain an example of Tumat tehom. What's the difference between Tumat yidua and Tumat tehom? Because I explained it to you, but here we're going to see an actual case, and in case you didn't know what this was. Ketzad, and they're going to add one other element that we discuss. Ketzad. Yagad litbol b'ma'aran. You went to go in a mikveh in a cave. Okay, I don't know if it really means a cave like our caves, but a mikveh that was in a cave. Now, you can imagine why they say a cave, because it's dark. You don't really see so well. And then there was a dead body floating there. Tameh, that's Tumat yidua. The dead body's floating. You might not have seen it, but it was floating and it was visible to somebody. But if it was at the bottom on the floor, it was sunk into the floor of the cave. Now it depends. What does it depend on? Well, yarad lahakel. If I went into this mikveh because it was a hot day out and I wanted to just dip in a pool, so tahol, nothing happens to me. I'm not considered impure because, again, this is Tumat tehom. Li taher mi tumat meit, but if I went to the mikveh to use it as a mikveh because I was impure, then tameh. I can't dunk in a mikveh that has a dead body in it. That no way does that work. Why is this? This is laws of what we call chazak, presumptive status. Shechazkat tameh tameh, v'chazkat tahor tahor. Sheraglayim l'davar. We'll get back to those words sheraglayim l'davar in a minute. Before we get there, this basically means I have what's called presumptive status. When I am impure, I need to actually purify myself to get out of my status. If I went in a mikveh with a dead body in it, we don't care if I saw the dead body, didn't see the dead body, the dead body was hidden to everybody. It doesn't make a difference. That mikveh is not going to work for me to get me out of my status. But if I'm tahor to begin with, I'm pure, and I just went in there to cool off, it's not going to make me any worse. We keep the status quo. Okay, Sheraglayim l'davar. Raglayim l'davar means there's pretty clear proof showing this is the case. Now, that's a very weird word in this context because there's no clear proof of anything. There's actually proof there's a dead body there. So what does that mean? So the Reish explains it. He says, lav dafka. Don't understand raglayim l'davar is raglayim l'davar the way it's normally used. What he says what it really means is, and then he says, by the way, the whole thing is halacha l'moshe misinai. So halacha l'moshe misinai really means, it's another way of saying there's really no logic. We can't explain it any logical way. It's just tradition. And raglayim l'davar means we can kind of explain it logically. So something doesn't make sense there. So he basically says, klomar k'tzat ta'am yesh b'davar. There's a little bit of reason for this. Why? Because chazkat tumat meit haya lo nitzna l'cha l'ta'aro. Says the logic is like this. We have halacha l'moshe misinai. The Tumat tehom is not a problem, but it's not. We're not going to take it so far. It's logical to say it won't apply in a case where you're already impure, and we're not going to let you purify yourself in that way. So that's what saying. There's logic to this distinction. Now the Gemara says, as I promised, is going to start off with the question: Manani mila. What's the root of this halacha? So again, we know in the end it's not going to be a pasuk, but they're going to attempt. Amar Rabbi Elazar. So two Amoraim from Israel, Rabbi Elazar and Lakish. Rabbi Elazar, one of the very famous students of Rabbi Yochanan. The pasuk says, and one is quoting a pasuk by Nazir, one is quoting it by Pesach. Those are the two that we know it's true for. So the way the pasuk describes a Nazir that becomes impure to a dead body, it says, if a mate dies alav, on me. It doesn't mean on me, it doesn't mean physically on me, it means while I was there. In some sudden way. So they say Allah. Why did it say Allah? Just could say ki yamut meit befeta pitom. When a dead body, right, a person dies, all of a sudden, and I happen to be there, but you don't need the word Allah. It's obvious I'm there. Otherwise, why would it be relevant? So they say, what do we learn from Allah? It has to be seen to me. If it's seen to me, then it's a problem. If it's not seen, it won't be a problem. Reish Lakish quotes a pasuk by Pesach Sheni. Or really it's Pesach Rishon, but then describing what you do in Pesach Sheni, which is Amar Kra ki yatameh lanefesh o b'derech rechoka. If you're impure at the time, or you're far away and you can't make Pesach Rishon, right? Then you do Pesach Sheni. So now it says, but what's it talking about? It's talking about tamei lanefesh. It's putting together two issues. Someone who's tamei, to a dead body, and someone who is far away, but b'derech rechoka, on the path that's far away. So meaning they can't get to the temple in time. Ki derech. So they say, look at tamei lanefesh and derech are right next to each other. We're going to learn from one to the other that Truma by Pesach is only a problem if it's tamei like a derech. A derech is a path. Ki derech. Ma derech bigaloi. Now, a path everybody sees. It's the road that's seen by everybody. Af kol bigaloi. Therefore, also Truma has to be noticeable to. That's how he gets. So the first question is, Ella, the first question is on Rabbi Elazar, the first proof. Ella haditnan, it says, now Tnan is usually a Mishna. In this case, it happens to be the Tosefta Zavim, which we're going to learn much more in depth at the end of today's daf. They're going to quote this entire Tosefta, this halacha in the Tosefta. It says in the Tosefta, Ezohu Tumat tehom. What is Tumat tehom? It has to be that no one, even at the other end of the world, knew about this. All of a sudden we hear a new definition. It's not just it was sunk into the bottom of the cave, but nobody knew there was a dead body here. That's why the excavation is the best way to think about it. Because you had no idea there were dead bodies and you start digging and all of a sudden you find a dead body. It's not like anybody knew there were dead bodies here. So that's Tumat tehom. Now, Bishlam alaman damar ki derech shapir. If you say like a path, that makes sense. It was unknown, just like, right? A path is known, and this was totally unknown. It fits perfectly. Ela laman damar bebechuveret lo. It had to be seen to you. According to Rabbi Elazar, it's all, could I have seen it or not? It has nothing to do with if someone else, right? There it seems, if I couldn't see it, it would be Tumat tehom. It has no relevance if other people knew about it, didn't know about it. If someone on the other side of the world, that's irrelevant to this drasha. This drasha seems to be focused on me, the Nazir. So they now say, what's the difference? If someone else knows around the world, it's all, did I notice it? Was it noticeable to me, to my eye? If someone happens to know, because it was their relative that was buried there, but I had no way of knowing that, according to Rabbi Elazar, it should be Tumat tehom, and according to this, it shouldn't be. So that rejects Rabbi Elazar and the two, and furthermore, they're now going to have a braita that seems to go against both, because we know it to be a fact that it's just by Nazir and Osabes. Now, one brought a pasuk by Pesach and one brought a pasuk by Nazir. But the assumption is, and this the Reish says inside, I'm not going to read it, but the Reish says, we assume that if one learns it from Nazir and the other learns it from Pesach, each one assumes that from Nazir we're going to learn to Pesach, and from Pesach we're going to learn to Nazir. But if that's the case, you should learn from there to everything, okay? And we're going to see that Tumat tehom does not apply to everything, okay? So what would everything be? We'll see in a minute. You find the dead body. We're also going to talk about this more. It's also in the Tosefta there. You're walking on a path, and there's a dead body that basically is under the ground. We didn't know it was there. But the body goes along the width of the road. So basically, wherever I walk, I'm going to be walking over that dead body, which is going to make me tameh. Well, it's not, though, because it's a case of Tumat tehom. It's all the way under the ground. Nobody knew of its existence, or most people didn't know. B'truma tameh, b'nazir b'asiyat pesach tahol. If I now come in contact with truma after I walk through that spot, the truma is impure. Basically, I carry impurity for truma. Or if I'm a Kohen and I want to eat truma, I can't. But for Nazir and Pesach, it's not an issue. So Mishna, according to the Psukim, one says it's Pesach by Nazir, one says Pesach by Korban Pesach. If we look at them each independently, one's going to learn from Nazir to Pesach, one's going to learn from Pesach to Nazir, and presumably to everything else. So why would we distinguish if it's a Pesach and the Pesach is already going to extend to other cases? Why wouldn't it extend to all cases? In which case, there's no reason from those Psukim to think that there's a distinction between Pesach, Nazir versus Truma. And we know there is. So to which they answer, our answer, which we already knew from the beginning, Ela Tumat tehom gemara gemira. It's a tradition, right? Presumably what they mean is it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This was passed down. It's an oral tradition passed down. We don't have it written anywhere, but it's a tradition that's passed down, and that explains it. And there's no other. And that, again, once you say that, it's the catch-all answer. It doesn't matter that doesn't make sense. Why would it just be Nazir and Oseh Pesach and not Truma? It's just the way it is. Okay, that's the way the tradition came down to us. Now, We're going to go back to also something I mentioned already, which is im ad shelo gilach, right? So the second part of the Mishnah was if you haven't yet shaved and then you find out, either which way it's sotel, it doesn't matter if it's Tumat tehom or if it's Tumat yidua, because you haven't yet shaved and you haven't finished your nezirut, it's going to cancel the previous days. To which they say, man Tana, the whole Tana, the Tana of our Mishnah, it's all about did you shave or did you not shave? It's not did you sprinkle the blood of the sacrifices or not. So they're going to say this is clearly Amar Rabbi Yochanan, right? Man Tana, who's the Tana of our Mishnah? Who does it match? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer. Clearly Rabbi Eliezer is the one who said the halacha. Ta'amal tiglacha ma'akevet, because he's the one who said the tiglacha prevents you from being able to drink wine. Other people think that the korban, right, is enough, or all, or one korban, the chatat maybe, but once you sprinkle the blood of sacrifices, you're done. And therefore, it shouldn't make a difference if you find out after that you were impure. That the issue would be the korban, not the shaving. This one clearly holds it's the shaving. Now we're going to get to the more complicated part of today's daf, and I say it's not so complicated to follow the flow. What's complicated is the content. The content is complicated because Rami bar Hama is going to ask a question, but it's very unclear what his question is. And in fact, there's a big debate between the Mefarish and the Rosh and Tosefta who go like the Rosh about what this question is. There's then a debate about what the answer is. It's very confusing. You'll see why it's confusing in a minute. So Rami bar Hama asked the following question. Rami bar Hama. Nitma b'toch melot. If you became impure during the days that you were a Nazir, let's say, like we said before, day 15, vinodalo la'achar melot, and you find out after you finish the days, mahu, what do we do? Batal yidi'ah, and the assumption is achar melot is after you finish the days, after you do the sacrifices, before you shave. Now, what's weird about Rami bar Hama's question, we're going to say in a minute, batar yidi'ah is linan, v'yidi'ah achar meloti, do we go by the moment you found out that you had become impure, which is now, which you're done already with your Nazir days, and you've already brought your sacrifices, even though you haven't shaved? Olo, or do we say it's like the middle days? It's right. We go by when you actually became tamei. It doesn't matter when you found out. It matters when you actually became impure. Ulamai, and what's the relevance of this question? Lemistal, to know whether it cancels your days of nezirut or not. Because if you're after you finish your days, right, then it wouldn't cancel your days. If you're before, it would cancel your days. Well, it'll depend a little. We'll see. It's not exactly true what I just said, but we'll get to that soon. But the big problem is, isn't this a halacha in our Mishnah? Like, what's he asking? He's asking the question of our Mishnah. So the Mefarish actually goes so far as to say an amazing statement, I think. I'll read it inside because it's just too unbelievable. The second to last line of the Mefarish, he says, Uli Rami bar Hama who asked this question, Lo shmi'alei matnitin. He obviously never saw our Mishnah. Crazy, right? Why is it crazy? Well, we know that Breita were passed down orally, and sometimes you heard a Breita, sometimes you didn't. But don't we have this impression that the Mishnayot were kind of put together as a book and everybody knew Mishnah? Like, you don't ask a question about the Mishnah. It's a little bit strange. So the Mefarish has a very unique interpretation that he's really asking the exact thing that's said in our Mishnah. And in fact, you're going to see the Rebbe says, oh, we can find the answer to your question in our Mishnah. Okay, so it's possible Rami bar Hama never saw the Mishnah, but hard to believe. The Rosh and others say, no, that's not what he's asking. Obviously, it cancels the days. Soter, that's what it says in our Mishnah. His question is, when it says sotel, what does it mean sotel? Does it mean sotel shloshim? Okay, you found out on day 31. Does that mean you have to go back to day 1 and start all over again? Or does sotel mean what we say sotel shiv'ah? It cancels 7. And what it means basically is you can't finish the process of nezirut until 7 days go by, because now you found out you were impure. So it's as if you became impure today. And what would, if you remember, there's a machlok of Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis about this. The rabbis say if you find out on day 31 that you're impure, if you become impure on day 31, okay, our case is where you became impure before, but you found out on day 31. But if you found out, if you became impure on day 31, there's a machlok. The rabbis say you go back anyway, and because you haven't finished your process, you haven't done your sacrifices or shaved, you have to go back to the beginning. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you just wait 7 days and then you bring your sacrifices and shave. So the question could possibly be, and this I think, I'm going to read this again this way because I think it makes more sense that he's not asking the question that the Mishnah says explicitly, but the question is, do you have to wait 7 days and then just finish up? Or does it cancel all 30 days? Since here, it's not that you became impure on day 31, it's that, right, you found out about an earlier impurity. So let's just assume that's his question, although, like I said, it's an assumption. It's not clear that that's what he's asking. But let's keep going. So now we're moving to Amud Bet. Amar Rav. Rava says, Tashma, let's learn it from our Mishna. Our Mishna says the answer to the question, which is the weakness of the Rosh and the Tosefta, because the Mishna doesn't really say the answer to the question, right? Okay, so Tashma, let's learn from here. Im ad shelo gileach, if you haven't yet shaved, which is our case that Rami Bar Hama is asking about, ben kach ben kach soter. It doesn't matter if it's Tumat Yedua, or it doesn't matter if it's Tumat tehom. No matter what, it cancels the days. So he says the following. Now, we assume this was the case of our Mishnah, but now they're just clarifying it's the case of our Mishnah. Hey, chidami, what's the case? There's two options. Either you actually became impure after and you found out after, or you became impure during your nezirut and only found out after. Now, we already explained the Mishnah as being the latter case. They're going to prove it has to be the latter case, and it can't be that you only became impure on day 31. That's not what the Mishnah is talking about. Because oh, sorry, I made a mistake. What they're trying to say, it definitely can't be, is that you found out about it during the days of your nezirut. Clearly, there was some gap, but the question is, when did you find out? Now, clearly, our Mishnah is talking about that you found out on day 31 after you did the korbanot, before you shaved, because otherwise, right? If it was that you found out during the days of nezirut, like on day, let's say I became impure on day 15, and I found out on day 20. Of course, it would cancel my days. What's the difference if I find out on day 20 or I find out on day 15? It doesn't matter if I found out later, no matter what. I'm now impure. I'm a Nazir. I haven't finished my process yet. Of course, it cancels the days. So Elalav, it must be the Mishnah. And again, they're just saying the obvious. It must be the Mishnah is talking about la'achar melo, that I only found out on day 31. Shema minan. Here, what does it say in the Mishnah? Ben kach ben kach sotel, right? If I haven't yet shaved, whether it's Tumat Yedua, whether it's Tumat tehom, it cancels the days. So, to which the Gemara says, it still didn't answer Rami Bar Hama's question. And here's the strength for the Rosh, which is adayin tibayilach. Still, we're going to question, though, kulo sotel, or shiva sotel. Does it cancel all the days of nezirut, or does it just cancel 7? It's a strength and a weakness to the Rosh, because the Rosh said that was the question to begin with. Now that it kind of, from the flow here, it seemed like, well, they thought they could answer the question from the Mishnah. They're saying, well, that didn't clarify it fully yet. We still don't know if it's 7 or 30. Again, it's a very unclear how exactly this works. But again, assuming the Rosh said, if you read the Rosh's reading, it's a little bit of a weird thing, because they bring the Mishnah to prove, is it 7 or 30? And then they say the Mishnah didn't prove anything about whether it's 7 or 30. So we're back to square one. So now they say, then they say, and Leman, according to who is your question, which opinion? If your question is 7 or 30, well, it depends who your question is according to. If your question is according to the rabbis all say that if I became impure on day 31, it would cancel all the previous days if I haven't yet finished my process, right? I would have to go all the way back to the beginning. So of course, in our case, if I find out on day 31, but I was really impure before, of course it's going to cancel all 30 days. So definitely, right, his question is not according to the rabbis, because that would be obvious. It cancels all 30 days. Ila Rabbi Eliezer. This is a machlokah we saw in Daf Tet Zayin, which is, again, just to make sure I'm clear, that everyone's clear on this. If, right, our case, again, is a case where I became impure on day 15, for example, sometime in the middle, and I only found out on day 31. Now, if I find out that I became impure on day 31, okay, I'm walking through a field, and it turns out I see a dead body right there, and I accidentally touch it. So if that happens to me on day 31, before I finish my sacrifices and shaving, or possibly just my shaving, depending on who you hold by, I will have to go back, according to the rabbis, to the very beginning and redo my entire nezirut, because until it's done, it's done. It's not done. So, of course, they would say the same thing here if, in the end, I find out on day 31 that I was impure, way before that, in the middle of my nezirut days. Now, so therefore, the question must be, Ila Rabbi Eliezer, Polachar Melot Shiva Sotil. If it's Rabbi Eliezer, also you shouldn't be asking the question, because what does Rabbi Eliezer say? If I became impure on day 31, I just wait the 7 days to become pure, and then I finish up my process. I don't need to go back to any days. So that's not a question either. So they kind of say, you ask 7 or 30, it depends if you're the rabbis or Rabbi Eliezer, to which they say, no, you can't compare Rabbi Eliezer 100%. You can't be sure that Rabbi Eliezer would say 7 here, because our case is different. We're kind of going in circles, and getting back to the original question, which is, Amar lecha, Rami bar Hama could say to you, he's not here, but they're trying to figure out his question. No. Hane mile, when Rabbi Eliezer says, achar melot shiva sotel, which means if I became impure after day 30, I only wait 7 days to become pure and finish the process. I don't have to redo any nazirite days because I finished my 30 days. That's only ki nitma achar melot. That's only if I actually became impure after I finished the days. V'hai lifnei melotu. This, though, is I became impure before. I just didn't know about it till now. So, o dilma shanehacha diyadia harmaloti. So that's his question. Or does it, right? This is all the question. Does it go by when I actually became impure, even though I only found out now? Or does it go by when I found out, which is right now? And if I found out right now and I'm on day 31, then all I need to do is wait 7 days. But if we say, no, it goes by when you became impure. Well, I became impure on day 15, I'd have to go back to the very beginning. So now we've clarified the question. All we're back at is the beginning. In a second, we're going to get an answer, but don't get excited because the answer is going to be incredibly unclear. This is the most unclear part of today's daf. But basically, our question is very simple. According to Rabbi Elazar, who thinks that on day 31, if you were to become impure, you would only need to wait 7 days and then just finish whatever part of the process you hadn't finished, bringing sacrifices or shaving, whatever you hadn't done. Well, what would he say if I found out on day 31 that I was impure on day 15? Does it go by when I became impure, which I would need then a whole 30 new days of nezirut, or does it go by when I found out, which would require only 7 days? To which the Gemara says, Umina. We can learn it from the Mishna itself. This actually probably Rava was saying, because Rava was the one who first answered, let's learn it from our Mishna. And Rabbanit says that also is found in our Mishna. How so? Katane, it says in our Mishna, now in the case where it says before you did the shaving, which is our case that we're discussing, it says ben kach u ben kach soter. Whether it's Tumat tehom, whether it's Tumat yidua, it cancels the days. V'lo kamiflage, and it doesn't distinguish at all. It doesn't distinguish between what and what. Not so clear, right? Sounds like it doesn't distinguish between Tumat tehom and Tumat yidua, but that wouldn't really answer our question. So what most of the commentaries say is it doesn't distinguish between before melot or after melot. And it doesn't distinguish whether I found out that I was tamei before or whether I found out I was tamei after, or it's unclear exactly what it doesn't distinguish, and whether it means it doesn't distinguish and it's clearly treated batar yidi'ah when I found out and it's only 7 days, which is the way the Rosh and the Meiri go. Or maybe it means it doesn't distinguish, and whereas in the beginning of the Mishnah we said soter meant go back 30 days, this also means go back 30 days. And that's the interpretation of the Mefarish. The Mefarish says, Lo shna ben hecha shenitma lifnei melot hecha shenitma la'achar melot desoteret kulan. It clearly cancels all the days. So the Mefarish basically says, because it doesn't distinguish, it means you have to go back to the very beginning. Okay, it goes by when you actually became impure. But the Rosh and others say, no, it goes back to when you found out, and you found out on day 31, therefore soter doesn't mean soter. The problem with the Rosh's interpretation, we're not done with the daf, but I'll end this section with this. If you don't follow, don't worry about this. This is an extra. But if you say that there's really no distinction, then the first case in our Mishna, Nazir shegilach, the first line, the nodalo shutamei im tuma yidua sotel, once you shaved, it actually goes back and cancels all the previous days. You can't understand it anymore according to the Rosh's. It cancels all the previous days. You'd have to say that soter there means that you'd have to wait 7 days and then maybe redo your shaving, something. It would have to be understood in some other way, which is difficult. So again, there's weaknesses with all the arguments. And as I say, the biggest weakness, or the biggest, I would say, critique I have is for the person who edited this or maybe didn't edit this and made this line that they thought was so clear to them. Oh, it says whether it's this, whether it's that, and there's no distinction. And it was obvious to them what they meant. It's clearly not obvious to anyone who came after. I mean, maybe it was obvious, but it was obvious to one person, it was one way, obvious to the other person, it was the other way, which already means it wasn't obvious and wasn't clear. And again, it's a good lesson in life to spell things out very clearly so that you don't lead people to misinterpretation. Okay, moving on to the next section. So basically, we ended up with this question from Rabbi Hama that we didn't really understand fully. We tried to, right, Rava tried to prove from the Mishna, we said that really didn't help us, right? We assume we're going to go with the Rosh, for simplicity's sake, and assume his question was, is it 70 or 30? And in the end, they answered the question. But in fact, in my summary for the daf, I struggled with how to write it. I just said, and the question is answered. Didn't say how the question is answered because there's two different ways to answer it, whether it's 7 or whether it's 30. Okay, now we're going to go into that Tosefta and basically learn about Tumat tehom. That's going to take us till almost the end of the daf, and then we have a very little short section, which is going to kind of lead into tomorrow. We'll just start it and deal with it more tomorrow. Now we're going to talk about different cases of Tumat tehom, and we're going to limit things a little bit, and we'll see. Hamotze tanu Rabbanan. So this is the Tosefta in Zavim. Hamotze met mutal lerochba shel derech. You find a dead body. Again, covering the whole width of the path. So I walked across this path. I clearly passed over this dead body. L'tchuma tamei u'benazir v'oseh pesach tahor. Now the assumption is this is tumat tahor. It was buried underneath. We didn't know that it was there. If it's for truma purposes, we learned this already. I'm impure. If it's for nazir v'oseh pesach, it's halacha l'mosh Mishna that it doesn't make me impure. B'med dvarim amurim though. But what's the case? It's only going to be, this really is talking about that it's going to be tamei for the purposes of truma if I have no way to pass other than passing over this dead body. That's the way we imagine this. But if there's some way I could get through without coming in contact, notice, what's this? This is the case of safek. I walked over this path. If the entire path is covered completely with a dead body underneath, I clearly passed over it. And I clearly became tamei because truma goes up. But if there's some way that I avoided it, we're going to see now a few cases, then it's truma, safek truma, safek tuma, it's safek possible impurity in Rishut Rabim, it's in public. Safek tuma, Rishut Rabim, we learn from the Sota, it's not tamei. So it's tahor. But so how does this work? If it's complete, whole body, not broken up, then it would be a problem. But if it was broken up into pieces, even if I clearly went over the area where the dead body was, imagine this takes up a whole bunch of space and I walked through, I could theoretically weave my way in and out. Since I could weave my way in and out, and also they say, if I'm walking, I'm narrow. So, I could avoid possibly making a tent kind of ma'ahil, the way they say, your body walks over, you basically become tamei from being over the body. But if I can weave my way in and out, it works. But if it was in a grave, like let's say in a coffin or something, because we learned this before, that if it's in a grave, then the grave combines everything, as if it doesn't matter if there's some broken pieces here and some broken pieces there and some empty space there, the whole space gets put together and the whole space is tamei. Now they say, right, and that's because the grave itself combines this all as one big unit. How can we assume that I can avoid it? If I'm walking by foot. But if I'm carrying a burden, the assumption is I can't weave my way in and out, or I can't be, think that I'll stay in a very straight position and won't lean over a little, maybe because of the burden on my back. I might wave this way, that way. I might waver, I might tilt a little bit, and then I'll definitely end up being over the body. Or rachuv, if I'm on a donkey or something, or on a horse or whatever I'm riding on, also, the assumption is probably, right, we'll go over that dead body. If you're walking, you can potentially avoid it. Again, you didn't know to avoid it, but it's possible that you avoided it. And again, this is all safek. But if you're on this donkey or you're carrying a big burden, there's no way that you didn't either touch it, or lasit is to move it. Somehow you kicked it somehow while you were walking, or shelo yahil, that you didn't somehow come over the dead body. This whole thing, by the way, is only b'tumat tehom, that we have this exception of nazir and oseh pesach. Aval tuma yedua, but if people all knew there was a grave there, then this is all shlosh tam tmeim. The nazir, the oseh pesach, the truma. Everyone, you're all going to be tmei. Ve'ezehu tumat tehom, and this also we saw before. What is tumat tehom? This would have to be, what does it mean nobody knew about it? Nobody in the entire world knew about it. But if one person in the world knew about it somewhere, again, it's a bit of an extreme explanation, but it's very limiting to tumat tehom, really. Hayat tamun, again, archaeological digs are the best example. It's talking about some old grave that no one knows existed anymore. Then it's not so unrealistic. There's for sure old bodies in all sorts of places. Hayat tamun b'tevin. Okay, Sasa wrote this in the chat before. If it's under a pile of hay, or b'tzorot, or pebbles, right? Presumably some building fell and there's rubble and it's buried underneath it. That is Tumat tehom. Harezo Tumat tehom. Biyamim of afela ubinikikas laim einzo Tumat tehom. But if it's in the water, a big body of water, or it's in a dark place, or it's between the cracks of the rocks, the nooks of the rocks, that is not Tumat tehom. Now, why not? What's the difference? So let's start with the dark. Dark is the easiest one, and then from there we can get to the others. If it's dark in some area, presumably at some point there could be light there, right? Someone could shine the light, someone could write maybe the sun doesn't get there sometimes of the day, but it gets there other times. So if it was dark when you were there and you didn't see it, but it could be seen in the light. If it was in the water, so if you're in this area, you might not have seen it, but someone in a different area, the water would have seen it. If it's in the cracks of the rocks, so it's true. These are all places where it might not be so noticeable, but it could be seen by people, as opposed to being buried underneath something where it's not visible at all. Okay, so obviously things that are clearly seen, of course, they're not Tumat tehom. They don't even need to tell you that. They're saying this in-between category would also not be considered Tumat tehom. And the last line of Tumat tehom is Lo amru Tumat tehom ela lemeit bilvad. Another line that's very unclear what this means. The rules of Tumat tehom only apply to a dead person only. Yeah. The Rambam has a very unique explanation. He says it means to a person who died for natural causes and not someone who was murdered or killed. Why there would be that distinction and how on earth you would know is a really good question, right? You're not buried with I died because, So anyway, I don't understand the Rambam so well. It requires further research why he says that. The more common interpretation is that it doesn't apply to other types of impurities, like, for example, zav. So what would be a case of Tumat tehom by zav, right? What's Tumat tehom? Now, zav, it's that you have some discharge or a zava. So what it means is that they want to say, if let's say, okay, getting back to Pesach, I'm standing on the 14th, I'm on my last day of my 7 clean days of being a zava, and I go to the mikveh in the morning, that's the way zava works. I wait till sunset to become pure fully. I'm called a Tful Yom. I can do the Korban Pesach. I can be part of someone's Korban Pesach because I'm already a Tful Yom and I'm going to be pure at night and eat that Korban Pesach at night. So I can be part of it. But what if after I do my Korban Pesach, I find some blood that day and I'm now impure, which means that retroactively I was impure. That's Tumat tehom because I didn't know I was impure when I really was impure in the morning, but I didn't know it because I thought I was going to finish and complete. Tumat tehom doesn't apply there. Okay, that's because I really was not pure. Okay, I have blood after, which basically canceled my mikveh in the morning, and it doesn't work. So that would be a possible example. Now, I see you're writing about sheretz. That's going to be our next case. So now the Gemara says, Ketzad yarad. So now they're going to talk about Tuma Yudua, not Tumat tehom, but Tuma Yudua. I know there's Tuma in this mikveh, we said, in the Mishna, and there was a body floating, and I went in the mikveh, right? It's a problem because the body was floating. It was noticeable. I'm impure, even though I don't know if I touched it or not. To which they say, Safa einam tam'ah l'inyan sheretz. But if I went in a mikveh and there was a sheretz in there, right? We don't assume that I touched the sheretz. Ditanya, how do we know this? Safek tumat safa. When you have a safek about tumah that's floating in a body of water, bein bekelim, bein bekarkatoha. Whether the water's in a vessel, okay, assuming we're talking about I put a vessel in the vessel, and then there was this, right, sheretz in there. Was the sheretz mitame my vessel? Because the sheretz can be mitame people or vessels. So I have a vessel inside my vessel. The big vessel was full of water. There's a sheretz floating in it, and there's a kli in there, and I don't know if they touched. Or I have water in the ground, like a big body of water, and there's a sheretz floating there. And I went in the water, let's say. Do we have to assume I touched it? Doesn't matter. Tehora. Okay, that's safek sheretz tahor. Rabbi Shimon omer bekelim tme'ah bekarkatoha. If it was in a vessel, it's actually impure. If it's a safek about in a big body of water, it's not. Okay, why this is, we're going to see tomorrow. The first question of the Gemara on tomorrow's daf is my time, or what's the reason? Okay, so quick review of our daf. We started with this distinction between a Nazir who already shaved and a Nazir who hadn't shaved yet. The Nazir hadn't shaved yet and finds out that at some previous point they become impure while they were a Nazir. So if it's before they shaved, it doesn't matter to me to do it Tumat tehom. It cancels the days. Again, we weren't sure exactly cancels in what way. Then we had, if you already shaved, then it depends whether it was Tumat Yudua or Tumat tehom. And then we defined what's Tumat tehom. And then we went into what's the source for this, which in the end, we tried 2 psukim, we rejected them. We said, no, it's really just a tradition. Then we went to say the Mishna is only Rabbi Eliezer because the tiglachat is what's important and not the sacrifices. Again, or it's both, right? You need both, which is clear from our Mishna. And then we went to this question of Rabbi Hama, tried to understand it. Is it Soter 7 and 30 according to the Rush? And in the end, we come up with an answer, but we don't know what the answer is after some back and forth of trying to figure out what he was saying. Then we got to this Tosefta, which we wanted to define all these different ways when it's considered Tumat and when it's not. We talked about different possibilities of could you have zigzagged, could you have not have, was it broken up and then zigzag is a possibility, and then for sure it's not a problem even for Truma. Right? We saw the distinction between Truma and Nazir and Pesach. The whole halacha Moshe Sinai that Truma tehom is not an issue, it's only for Nazir and Pesach, not for the Truma. And then we ended with this thing about the sheretz and said the sheretz is a little bit different. And if sheretz is Tuma Yedua, it still wouldn't necessarily be a problem if we're not sure you came in contact with it or the kli or the vessel came in contact with it. And is there a distinction between whether it was floating in a body of water that was a big body of water in the ground, or it was floating in a body of water that was in some sort of vessel? With that, we'll finish for today. Have a great day, everyone. And don't forget to register for one of the siyum somewhere. We'd love to see you somewhere. Have a great day.